I consider it a great honor that I have been asked by Hillel to speak to you about the fate of the Jews of Europe. 12 years of unprecedented trauma for the Jewish people. I feel so far away from what the occasion demands. The destruction of European Jewry is a vast and painful topic. Auschwitz, a name that has come to symbolize absolute evil, has thrown Western man's conception of civilization, culture, and God into question. Auschwitz, a name that has come to symbolize totalitarian dehumanization, a name that is linked by such diverse writers as Elie Wiesel and Norman Mailer to Hiroshima, the bomb, genocide carried out in accordance with 20th century techniques of mass production. Hiroshima and Auschwitz symbolize the central madness and trauma of the 20th century. And at the center of the whirlwind were the Jewish people. I'm concerned tonight with the impact of Auschwitz on the Jewish people in the diaspora. It would be presumptuous of me to address myself to the response Auschwitz demands of Christians and Gentiles. I cannot speak for all Jews. I speak only as one Jew. To stand before you, guarded in the academic armor of objectivity, would be inappropriate this evening, which marks the beginning not only of a period of remembrance, a period of mourning for the victims of the Nazi evil, but it also is the beginning of the Shabbat, the weekly reminder to the Jewish people that the universe and man is the creation of God. On Friday evenings, time stops, and the Jewish people taste the delight of eternity. There are tens of thousands of survivor accounts. Many of them, written in Yiddish, remain uncatalogued, unread, untranslated at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Studies in New York City. The cry of the victim continues to fall on deaf ears, just as the world turned its back on those same victims when they were still alive. To immerse oneself in the literature of the Holocaust is to drive a stake into one's spirit, a stake that continues to bore into the deepest recesses of one's mind after one surrenders, defeated, unable to listen any longer to the horror without succumbing to nihilism or the latent self-destructiveness that reading the fate of the Jews of Europe stirs up, awakens. The attempted solution of the Jewish problem is the greatest problem of all for those Jews who survived, and we are all survivors. We have come together to remember. Remember what? Remember the dead and offer them our silent prayers and silently beg their forgiveness. We have come together to remember what happened. But too often, one doesn't know what happened. The facts are not all in. But it is, in my opinion, the sacred obligation of everyone, and Jews especially, to know what happened. To do less is to desecrate the suffering and death of our fellow Jews, whose grave is in the air like smoke. But there is a tendency to de-Judaize the horror and make of it a general evil which man in general must learn in order to prevent it from happening again. But what happened in Europe has come to symbolize more than the horrors of war, as we have seen. There were two wars, and when the German Nazis were losing the battle against the Allies, they nevertheless persisted in the extermination of the Jews and used trains to deport Jews to Auschwitz, trains that could have been used in the general war effort. Eichmann diverted trains from military use in order to deport the Jews of Hungary to Auschwitz. He tried to make a deal with Joel Brand, a leader of the Jewish Rescue Committee of Hungary. Eichmann offered Brand 1 million Jews in exchange for 10,000 trucks. 1 truck for every 100 Jews. The offer failed. Brand was unable to get the trucks. Brand left Budapest for Istanbul in order to see if he could negotiate the possibility of raising the money or the trucks themselves. He spent 15 days there and left under the assumption that he was going to go to meet others who would perhaps negotiate the trucks. But he was arrested 2 days later by the British and held by them, and soon afterwards there were no longer 1 million Jews to save. He was kept a prisoner in Cairo, and while there he spoke with Lord Moyne in the British Egyptian Club there. The subject of the trucks and the Jews came up. Lord Moyne asked Brand, "Mr. Brand, what shall I do with those 1 million Jews?" But by that time, 500,000 of them had already been gassed in the chambers of Auschwitz. Auschwitz was created in order to exterminate Jews. Many others perished there, but the Jews were singled out as a people destined to disappear from the face of the earth. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Krumhof, Lublin. There were 6 extermination centers. Before then, when Germany marched against Russia, they were accompanied by mobile killing units. And these killing units were known as the Einsatzgruppen. They accompanied the German army in its push into Russia. And they accomplished, before the camps were in operation, the destruction of 1,400,000 Jews. Hitler warned of that in 1935. He said, if the world goes to war, the Jews will see their final end. And under the cloak, as it were, of the war in general, the war against the Jews was carried out simultaneously. The Einsatzgruppen, however, relied somewhat on the populations of Eastern Europe in general for help. They found much support in Romania. Romania, which was allied to Germany in the war, defeated Odessa. And before the Einsatzgruppen arrived there, partisans had blown up a building in Odessa, and in retaliation, the dictator of Romania demanded that the Jews be rounded up and shot, to the number of 200 Jews for every single victim that the partisans had claimed. But the retaliation far exceeded anything that the dictator had ordered. And so the result was that in 2 nights, 60,000 Jews were shot and thrown into open graves. It was the single greatest massacre of organized killing that had yet taken place. There were others, such as Babi Yar, but this even exceeded Babi Yar. The Jews were first defined, and the definition process was long and complicated. It had begun in the 1920s when the Nazi platform was being drawn up. From the very inception, the anti-Semitism that it later became famous for was already part of it. In 1935, there was the largest to date Nazi rally at Nuremberg. And out of that occasion, Hitler asked for, among other things, a law to define Jews, who was a Jew after all, and how they could not proceed with further anti-Jewish legislation unless it was clarified, that is, the earlier Nazi platform were clarified concerning who was a Jew. And so Jews were defined. Then they began to be deported and ghettoized in Eastern Europe. Afterwards, they were once again deported from the ghettos and moved into the camps. By the spring of 1942, the camps were ready. The decision had been reached sometime in early January of 1942, that they were to be exterminated. But still there were no camps. Then the particular camps, which were a combination of gas chamber and concentration camps, were set up. It's important to remember that Dachau, which was liberated by the Americans, Bergen-Belsen, liberated by the British, Mauthausen, Buchenwald, Theresienstadt, were concentration camps and eventually became killing centers. But they were camps before the war began. And the camps that were set up after the war in the spring of 42 were set up so that the extermination of the Jews could be more efficient. The Einsatzgruppen had certainly killed many, but it wasn't enough. And with the invention of Zyklon B, the gas that was used, it became apparent that many more millions could be killed more quickly and efficiently. And then, as the war turned and the Allies, it became clear, were going to be victorious, Germany, one by one, abandoned the camps. Auschwitz was the last to be in operation, but it too was finally abandoned. And the concentration camps that were in Germany, such as Dachau, began to be used as killing centers, along with Bergen-Belsen and Buchenwald. In January of 1945, Russia entered Auschwitz. Before the Germans abandoned Auschwitz, one crematoria had been blown up in a resistance effort by the group who worked on the getting of the bodies out of the crematories. was left of them, the death commando. All of the men and women who were involved in the rebellion, which succeeded in blowing up one chimney, were killed. Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia was a special sort of concentration camp, different from any of the others in its initial purpose. It was set up by Heydrich for old people and Jewish war veterans and prominent Jews whose disappearance in a killing center would arouse suspicion of the words resettlement and going to work. But eventually, a good portion of the Jews who were held at Theresienstadt were also evacuated and sent to Auschwitz. At first, however, the Nazis expected an uproar from the world and felt the necessity of keeping their operations secret and the necessity of setting up a camp which would serve as proof that the resettlement lie and the going to work lie were true, and that the aged who could not be expected to go to work were being treated in some way that could resemble a definition of the word humane. We can, if we wish, go through a description of the process of how the Nazis accomplished the extermination. We can also describe the various Jewish acts of rebellion. But I don't think that history and the account of the revolts by the victims answers the questions that the evil and suffering raise. Auschwitz, to my mind, has no meaning. But the history of the Jewish people and Jewish thought does provide a place for a beginning. The Jewish people claim to be chosen by God, to obey His commandments, live by them in the world, and the rabbinic tradition which ramified, clarified, and adapted and developed the Jewish way of life after the Jews were dispersed throughout the world offers us a further post on the long road of the beginning. The Jewish philosopher and theologian Emil Fackenheim has written, "A Jew at Auschwitz was murdered because he was a Jew. A Christian was murdered only if he was a saint." Hitler was able to act, to solve the Jewish question so quickly because he found waiting for him a whole body of church anti-Jewish legislation which he could use, and a European population which, by being largely Christian, was also familiar with regarding the Jew as hostile, criminal, and parasitic. In 306, the Catholic Church prohibited intermarriage and sexual intercourse between Christians and Jews. In September 1935, as part of what is now known as the Nuremberg Laws, Nazi Germany declared a similar prohibition in its laws for the protection of German blood and honor. In 1215, the identification of Jews with a badge was declared mandatory by a papal decree. A similar decree was issued by the Germans in September of 1941. The list of similarities in terms of the legislation, the anti-Jewish laws, is astonishing. And when Luther broke with the church, he continued the anti-Semitic tradition nevertheless. Passages from his book about the Jews and their lies, if the dates were left out, read like the rantings of much that you can find in Nazi literature propaganda of the period. The Nazis didn't need to invent a stereotype. Christian thinkers of immense stature had invented that stereotype for them. When Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Jews were thrown out and the temple destroyed, and God went with the Jews into exile in this world. The Jewish people themselves became God's sanctuary, God's temple in this world. To the faithful Jew, the continued existence of the Jewish people provided living proof that God exists. If the Nazis had succeeded in their plan and killed every Jew on earth, they would have rid the world not only of Jews, but of God the Father and God the Creator. And without the universal Creator and Father, his offspring, the offsprings of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, would have been attacked at the root, and the only being upon whose existence their own existence depends would have been unavailable to them, and they would have withered and died too. The Jews brought God into the death camps, and they took him out of the death camps. And it is for that reason that Auschwitz and what it signifies rises above the problem of history, the problem of political science, the problem of philosophy, or any other of the disciplines, the roads to knowledge which man has available to him. The singularity of the Nazis having determined to exterminate the Jews for no other reason that they were alive and the Nazis wanted them dead makes of the event something transcendent. It is the most furious assault on the reality of God in the world's history. It is this which I think it important for us to remember. One question that is likely to come up is, why should I bother? It's too painful. It is a valid question, and one that will be asked again and again, for there is no simple, satisfactory, or complete answer to it. During the war, Maya Levin, the American writer, worked as a correspondent in Europe, and he was one of the first reporters to visit the camps of Buchenwald, Dachau, and others soon after their liberation. One reaction of those people who had been systematically dehumanized, and who, if they were not immediately gassed, exchanged their former names for numbers tattooed into their skin, was to write their names wherever they could and everywhere. I'm quoting now from his autobiography. In every camp, the rates of Jews crowded around my Jeep, and I don't know where the custom started, but as they heard I had been to one camp and another, they began to write their names in pencil on my Jeep, the hood, on the fenders, until the entire vehicle was covered with the scrawls of the survivors in Hebrew and Roman characters, their names. This was the beginning of the scrawled legendary I was to see all during the coming years on the walls of every cabin, every office, every DP center, every hospital where the Jews passed, on the walls of every way station on the secret route to Palestine. They wrote their names out of passion of survival, as though to prove that it was so, that they had an identity, that they were alive. It was out of the same passion for survival that many survivor accounts were written. And they spoke not only for those who were still alive, but mainly for those who could no longer speak for themselves. We cannot devote ourselves to a lifetime of listening to stories of atrocity without denying life. We must choose among them and incorporate as much of the experiences that we read about as we can. And so we become able to remember. We cannot afford to turn a deaf ear to those who have suffered. In this particular instance, it is not a question of remaining innocent, but of choosing to remain ignorant and thus evading one's responsibility as a human being. Evil may be spoken of abstractly, but it makes itself felt to very specific forms only. And if we do not know the forms it takes, we will be at a disadvantage in the fight against it. It is beyond us to answer the question, why? it is enough that we try to discover what happened. And it is sacrilegious to ignore what happened to the Jews, because without God, the Jewish people cannot be said to exist, to be a reality, despite the fact that it is certainly possible to be a Jew and not believe in God. And I think it proper to say that without the Jews, who of all the peoples of the world have remained faithful to God the Father, God the Creator only, that without the Jews, God's existence in the world as we have known it would no longer be a conceivable reality. For Jews, the Messiah is not God, nor is God the Messiah. It is not here a question of self-interest, nor of invalidating the sufferings of others, but if we are recalling the martyrdom of European Jewry, a description of how the extermination was carried out does not suffice, nor is it here a question of ascribing guilt or of seeking in the victims the cause of their own destruction. If we are memorializing the victims of an attempted assassination of a people to which they belonged, then it is appropriate to look at what the Jewish people has stood for, not as a symbol in the eyes of the rest of the world, whether liberal or anti-Semitic, whether as an embodiment of man's fate in general, or the anti-Semitic portrait of a powerful species of vermin, simultaneously inferior and superior, simultaneously the cause of capitalism and communism. The Jewish people, however, is not a symbol to itself. The Jewish person does not have to be convinced of his humanity in general. To the self-respecting Jew, there is no need to make any distinction between man and Jew. He does not symbolize anything. He is. They are one. The oldest and most influential portion of American Jewry has spent a great effort in reducing being Jewish to a narrow definition of Judaism as one religious denomination among others, which reconciles religious freedom to nationalism and minimizes Jewish particularity. Auschwitz is a negative reminder of that particularity. One cannot build anything on the ashes of the victims, but one can respond to the memory with one's life. One can remember that to be Jewish is to be a Jewish human being. It is not here only a question of faith. The Jewish people is different. Its history has been different. Its destiny is different from other peoples in the world. The greatest memorial the survivors in the diaspora can build to the victims of Nazism is to rededicate themselves, to turn to Jewish life in all its variety and richness, and live fearlessly as Jews. That would constitute the greatest resistance, for it would put a stop to what Hitler's intention was, to annihilate the Jews, and it is the obligation of world Jewry not to give him posthumous victories. In my opinion, the greatest sign of hope that evil can be stopped would be for the Jews to live fearlessly as Jews. Evil would be prevented and defeated in the ultimate sense. For to be a Jew means to be dedicated to transcendence, not by sidestepping this world, but by transforming this world. Not for the sake of the Jewish people. Evil is to be defeated so that all men can enjoy peace, and not for man's sake alone, but for the sake of man's participation in divine partnership, to which the Jewish people continues to bear witness.